Jodet, welcome on stage, please. It's a partner of Exchange, a venture capitalist investment fund based on blockchain technology. Perhaps you will allow us to understand how could we evaluate a business on decentralized autonomous organization. And I'm honored to manage this panel today. So, we are now various experts from France, Berlin, Switzerland. Thank you so much, first of all, to come here in Paris to illustrate what brilliant things we can do with decentralized autonomous organization. First time we heard about DAOs was in 2016 with the project called the DAO from the blockchain Ethereum. Since 2016, we have made lots of advancements regarding the use of DAOs and the trust they can provide. And I would like to ask you with a basic question, but we need to start with that to make sure we are aligned with the audience. What is currently a DAO and how it's work? Leemo, please, could you let us know what is it? Because you are starting Chaos DAO.
I would say at a basic level, a DAO is a governance framework to allow the members of the DAO to democratically vote in a way where you have stakeholder capital, right? The members are the ultimate decision makers, and that can be a social DAO, it can be a protocol DAO like Polkadot, it can exist in a lot of different ways that you have this governance framework.
So basically, is a virtual entity who runs and relies on smart contract. I think smart contract is one of the core concept related to DAOs. Please, Arthur, could you just let us know what about the characteristic of a DAO and how is reliable to smart contract?
So yeah, indeed, I think the smart contract is important. I think we might stay inclusive and maybe imagine forms of decentralized autonomous organizations that do not rely on smart contracts per se, but in the end you need a way to have this decentralization that's part of its name. And of course I totally agree with the framework part. I think it's a tool, like blockchain is a tool, to enable people to organize themselves and to trust each other while working together. And I think that's one of the points I try to care about. We are today building a DAO for l'Humanité, a French journal, thinking about what it could be. And I think sometimes you need to answer what it cannot be. And in the end, it cannot be run by one entity, it cannot be centralized. So, of course, I might say the evidence here, but it has to be decentralized and it has to be autonomous. So decentralized thanks to tools, but also thanks to the logic of its governance. And that's why I think the governance framework definition is the best one.
So basically, if we can say that without smart contract, DAOs cannot work, because smart contracts runs the rules and define the rules between all the members. And the membership of a DAO belongs to what? How can I be sure that I'm a member of this organization? Patrick, could you let us know how can we make sure that we are a member of a DAO or we are not a member of a DAO?
Well, I think it's fairly simple. A DAO usually, I would say, has a token. I haven't seen one that hasn't, so I don't know if anyone's seen that, but partaking in some form of ownership of the token will give you representation proportional to how long you may have had that token, how many tokens you have, and that gives you a right to vote or submit propositions within the DAO.
So if we compare with traditional business running on a company, when you are a shareholder, it's because you have a share of the company. And you are a member of a DAO because you have a token. So it means that every DAO runs on smart contract, and as a member of this DAO, you have a token. But with this token, depends on a DAO, we can do various things. Luc, could you just let us know what is the most interesting DAO you already seen in terms of rights given, provided by the token ownership?
So I don't know which one's the most interesting. There are tons of them. The question is, to me, is more like which ones are actually kind of working today, because we're still in the early stage, I think, of DAOs. The ones that we see working well today are kind of investment DAOs. So kind of group of people pot of money together, a pot of cryptocurrency together, and then have in a wallet with a multi-sig, and then have a smart contract that enables kind of proposing and deals and voting on it. To me, that's what is kind of starting to find a product market fit that works with DAOs. All the rest, and I'm part of many DAOs that I really enjoy. You see the governance is still, trying to find a way to get either participation or find ways to delegate. And I think that's those evolutions is what we're seeing slowly right now. In it's like something like Friends with Benefits. It's fascinating. I had to vote on whether or not we actually wanted to sell some tokens to Andreessen Horowitz before the deal was announced as a member. That's fascinating. At the same time, it felt a bit mute because it was kind of obvious that everybody was, yes, of course, we'll sell $10 million worth of tokens to Andreessen Horowitz. So it's still early, and there's still plenty of things interesting. As I said, investment DAOs right now for me are probably the ones that are finding a product market fit that kind of works.
You raise an interesting point and jump into another question, another aspect. It means that DAOs could be used for various areas: charity, investment, vote, social governance. And so it means that DAOs are not related to only one use cases. And it asks a question about how can be member of a DAO since the beginning. Does a DAO will remain always open to new members, or it could be a closed-ended DAOs? What do you think, guys? Take the mic if you have something interesting to say about that right now.
They don't need to necessarily be open. Maybe at the start they can be, but the members of a DAO can change the rules of the DAO and make it closed. It's a very flexible organization type.
So it means that everyone can enter or exit from. Am I right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, please, Archer.
Yeah, I think it's, we were talking about smart contracts. The idea of smart contracts is that the rules of the governance are run by the smart contracts, but the rules to change the rules also are in the smart contracts. And if people vote, you have to have an amount of yes, an amount of people voting. But if people vote for changing the rules and the governments, it has to change, and no one central entity can avoid changing the rules when the DAO decided it. And I think when we are talking about DAOs that are running today and working, people running the DAO have to imagine one day they might get ruled out, voted out. So that's one point I think we have to keep in mind when talking about true decentralized DAOs.
This is one important point about Polkadot. It's fully decentralized. There's no single authority that has to implement some governance vote. It's all permissionless. Anybody in Polkadot can propose anything, be that a runtime upgrade or requesting money from the treasury or anything in between. We don't have to rely on an entity like Parity Technologies or Web3 Foundation to actually implement that stuff. It's all self-executing. And a lot of other protocols, if you count protocols as DAOs, they have this single point of failure where the community, the DAO members, have to signal their intent on something, and then the developer team has to actually implement that. So you're trusting the developer team to actually follow through on what the community voted on, whereas on Polkadot, you don't need to do that. You don't need to trust anybody, and it's really, really powerful.
The question you raised implies the choice of the protocol itself. And we know currently that in the Polkadot ecosystem, running DAOs is currently a top trending topic currently, because perhaps it was the wish of the Dr. Gavin Wood, which is the author and founder of Polkadot, but more than that, he introduced the concept of smart contract with the publication of a purple paper a few years ago. So if you have a choice to select a protocol, why did you choose to select Polkadot instead of other EVM blockchains? Who can answer to it? Simon, I trust you.
I can start to speak. there are many differences between protocols. Well, we at Hexaion, we are really agnostic in terms of protocol. We are the road builders during the automobile revolution. So we build, we pave the roads for protocols to be able to be adopted by big institutions. So we often do some advisory for companies who would like to start a DAO. The main reason why Polkadot is often chosen by us is the roadmap and the interoperability between all the parachains that gives a bright future for any type of DAO that would like to run on Polkadot, because it won't lack of an issue with interoperability in the future, because well, as you know, Polkadot will be able, all the Polkadot ecosystem will be able to send message from one parachain to another in the future. And so building a DAO on the Polkadot ecosystem is something that is really, really more than a good idea, I would say.
Leemo, we know that you're already running a DAO on Polkadot. Could you let us know why you have chosen Polkadot instead of other blockchain protocols?
So when we founded Chaos DAO, we were basically just in the community and enjoy, like you said, this interoperability. And from there, we decided that our DAO, we want to focus on governance. So our members vote in our internal voting, and we vote on Polkadot, Kusama, and HydroDX on-chain governance. So we collect delegations, and we use that power to that collective size to kind of try and move the protocol in the direction that we think about, right? I think Polkadot in general is the best ecosystem in terms of how open it is. And a lot of other ecosystems are very lacking on the governance front, in my opinion.
So you have chosen to start your DAO because of the governance of the protocol itself, not your DAO. So it's important to have the relevant choice regarding perhaps for investment aspects. Luke and Patrick. Patrick, you run your own business dedicated to gaming. Luke, you used to invest on some companies and perhaps some DAOs. Do you think that the choice of the protocol could be, for you, an issue when you decided to invest on a specific company or perhaps on a DAO?
Yeah, so at Exchange, so we can invest both in equity and tokens. First fund in France to be able to do it. And of course, some of the investments either have could have a DAO or some form of on-chain governance at least. So we're extremely interested in seeing that they actually have at least some concept of how to apply this. So it's still, once again, governance on-chain is still quite nascent and young. And so we're mainly looking for people that are interested in experimenting and really committed to building, because we do think it actually helps with federating the community. Now, when it comes to the underlying protocol, we're quote-unquote chain agnostic, meaning that we can we're okay with any chain. It just needs to make sense, needs to be able, the application needs to actually serve a customer in the end, and that's a real question for us. So we indeed, most of the investment we've made was more in the EVM side of things. We are looking at least one investment, or two investments in the Polkadot, who's built on a parachain on Polkadot. So we're open to it. The only thing is, today it is true, we know most of the adoption has gone on Ethereum. This being said, we do see some community building on other chains like Polkadot, Cosmos, even to a certain extent Starknet. So we're very open, and the question is mainly, is your product actually filling a need for a community that is there? And as long as you answer that question, the underlying protocol, as long as it's decentralized enough, let's say. I'm sorry if there's Solana people here, but yeah, We're
Rip.
multi-chain, but
Rest in peace, people.
It will take a bit of convincing for me to invest in Solana projects, but I'm open to. I'm a VC, so I change my mind all the time. But as long as you're decentralized enough, we're looking at any of those chains or protocol.
Okay, so, but for companies, just keep the mic, I have another question for you, I think it's really important. For companies or people who want to run a DAO tomorrow, if they want to raise funds in front of VCs like you, the question is how can we evaluate the DAO? Because with companies, we used to use traditional metrics like free cash flow, DCF, other methods to evaluate a company. But for DAOs, how could we, do you think on your expertise, experience, how could we evaluate them?
Today, so of course, all those metrics are, even in the traditional world, evolve over time. I mean, back in the day, we used to value companies at the book value, basically literally the hard assets you had in the value, in the company. Now we value with discounted cash flows, and for startups, even discounted cash flow, we value on a multiple of ARR, so kind of like what we consider recurring revenue, or at least revenue that we feel is has some staying power at least. So all those metrics evolve all the time in the traditional world, and in the more crypto world on tokens, they evolve even more because they're even newer. So there's plenty of ways to evaluate. Still, there are some basics. I mean, fees generated by the protocol, I think, is today the way we measure activity probably the most accurately, and that's how you see some protocols, being able to really generate fees paid by the users compared to other protocols that don't. It's not the only metric. Just like in VC, that's not the only metric you look. ARR is not the only metric. Usage could be something that we're looking at. So how many transactions, how many active users. When it comes to governance, we're also talking about participation. It's like, do you actually? It's nice to have, I don't know, 100,000 members, but if you only have like 10 that are actually actively participating, it's not really it's not really interesting. So all those metrics can be looked at. Fees, in general, a VC kind of likes to see cash flows and see that there are some people paying for a service. So that will be our default, but we'll also look at a bunch of other metrics as well.
So basically, it's not easy, and we have to take a look on the various metrics like how many members you have in a community, how many active members do you have, does your business revenue and business model fit the need of the market, and of course the team behind the start of the DAO.
Yeah, so the earlier you go, the earlier you're looking more at the capacity for the team and the structure to build what they're promising. The more you're advancing, the more you're going to, can you actually generate, not necessarily profits, but at least some value and capture that value. And that's core to what we're looking. But yeah, if you're really early, mainly you're looking at the team and you're looking at participation, at is there a community that actually committed to this, to building this.
Okay, thank you so much for this question. If you have a few questions, just keep in mind, I will come back to the audience in a few minutes, but we raised an important point. Yes, Arthur, I will give you the mic. Please let us know what you want to say.
I was just thinking, and tell me if you don't agree, I think that might be interesting. Maybe in the definition of the DAO, we did not distinguish between the project of running a DAO and the project run by the DAO. And I think maybe one of the key metrics when you're looking at a DAO is maybe the community around it and the difference between the community and the members or active members, participating members, but also maybe one of the most interesting DAOs are the ones that are building something, the organization that is existing not to regroup people that are passionate, not only, which is already something, but a DAO that is organizing people and reuniting people who are building something. And then the product being built, or products, have a value also, and not only for VCs, of course, I think they have, but also for corporate, which is more of my job, for corporates to, through DAOs and DAOs building, understand the Web3 and the Web3 space and the philosophy it offers of decentralization and everything you know we share about Web3. So maybe we have to distinguish between the two concepts.
I would say that you're spot on with that. Just coming from the gaming space, you have a product team that's actually building something, right? It takes a lot of cohesion within a team just to even understand the vision, and that's on the game team. There's a lot of games that have DAOs. I think there's a really big one, Star Atlas, that is trying to, have its own Polis token that you can then vote on features to get to the game. And honestly, we looked into a DAO and scrapped it because it's just too difficult to have individuals that aren't on the game team understand the direction of the game or a product or a company. And so having that kind of delineation of the business side of it versus the community. And this is why I think a lot of DAOs, again, specifically in gaming, are DAO lights. You can vote on these special features that can get into the game, but the game team chose which features to put up for vote. It's not like coming out of the ether. You don't have design by committee, so nothing gets done. And I think this is a great way that to articulate it. You just have the actual, business of the DAO versus that community aspect. And then we can get into like the legal aspect of it, like who's actually creating the legal DAO versus who's trying to participate in it.
So for you, we need a captain on a boat.
Yeah, no, yeah. Yeah, no, thank you.
So
I think maybe there's I think being able to vote because you are a member of a DAO is something that has some value, but has its limits. And I think voting in France as a citizen is a right, but in DAOs, it's more like you're giving something to the team by voting. You're not the one you are getting something because you're giving feedback and stuff, but voting is not a right that you are so lucky to have. In the end, the team is happy for you to vote. But so maybe interesting DAOs that are more evolved today are the ones that are not only having their community vote, but their community take part in the more than the governments, in the product, but I think this is the hardest part, because as you said, having people give their opinion or maybe ideas, not only opinions and not only votes, giving their ideas on products, they have to understand it, that in the end they have to be part of the team, not just of the community.
So I usually have a joke on DAOs, but which is just a parallel with DeFi, where in DeFi we always say it's funny because we're just reinventing all of finance or revisiting all of finance, 200 years of finance at warp speed, and rediscovering a bunch of things that have already been discovered by traditional finance. DAOs, I think, are doing the exact same thing. They're rediscovering like 2,000 years of corporate governance and rediscovering obvious things. I mean, the first thing is at the beginning, DAOs were kind of like everybody votes on everything, and then what happens is that, well, there are very few people that have just the time to actually vote on everything. So you start having delegates, and so you recreate a representative system, and then of course you have a bunch of representatives that take decisions, but they don't necessarily execute because they're just representatives. So what? Well, you name a bunch of people that actually are here to execute those decisions and manage and build, and then there's honestly one vision and it needs to be organized. So you kind of need maybe one person that kind of organizes all the other executives, and you've recreated, the traditional corporate structure with the CEO, an executive team,
and the shareholders,
and an assembly of shareholders. So this being said, while it's a joke, I think what happens also while we do this is that because we're revisiting, all those things, we're also discovering and implementing new things. I mean, liquid democracy, that is at the core of some of the delegation system that we've put in place in DAOs, is something that's very interesting. It's like, why do we have to, why is each delegate as important? If there are 10 people in the DAO and 3 delegates, they should not have each a third of the vote. And if there's 5 votes for one delegate, this guy should have 5. I don't know, 3 and 2 because they have 2 votes. So those kinds of ideas, because we're reinventing the wheel, basically, means that we're also finding new efficiencies that have been completely bypassed by all this 2,000 years of history. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to reinvent, to revisit those 2,000 years of history.
So it's one of the challenges of the governance of the DAO itself. So it means that when you start and set up a DAO, be careful about the governance rule you already put in the code, because it will be perhaps difficult to change it, and because you have a sustainable business, perhaps it's not working because you suffer from your own organization, your own challenges. The other question we can ask, like an entrepreneur, is that if I'm going to set up a DAO, is there any legal recognition? Is there any legal issues? Can I set up a DAO here in France or in the United States?
Yeah, you can set up a DAO from basically anywhere. From what I know, one of the most advanced projects in legal recognition is called City DAO. So it's a DAO that is established in Wyoming in the US, because in 2021 a law passed and recognized officially in Wyoming the DAO
like a
governance.
limited liability company, an LLC, yes.
Yeah, and the DAO governance. And so it's basically it's a city that is tokenized in NFT. The piece of lands are tokenized in NFT, and you can have a citizen ownership by having an NFT. And they are currently trying to build a city through a DAO to, well, reinvent politics and how to govern a city through the blockchain and the traceability and the transparency of the blockchain. So from what I know, it's one of the most advanced projects in having a DAO legally recognized. I don't know if there have been some advance since, but I think it's one of the good examples on how a DAO can be legally recognized and how we can build, quote, real stuff, unquote, using blockchain.
Please.
During your presentation before the panel, you said that France is very pro-crypto, very friendly for crypto and blockchain and DAOs. In France, what are the types of businesses that a DAO can open? Is it like a non-profit organization? I think it's called non-lucrative organization in France. From your experience, what's the most common type of business model?
So I'll answer that quickly. I made an investment in Morpho, who actually uses an association. This being said, the association does not really represent the DAO. There's not really any correlation between the two. When we created the DAO for Ariane, we did that with a Swiss company, with a French association owning all the shares. So there's plenty of different weird structures. Of course, the foundation structure, but same thing. It's never really a representation of the DAO. It's just more like a way to have a pool of money managed, and then there's no official, one for one. And ultimately, to answer your question, your earlier question, the thing about DAOs, what's interesting is that what I found fascinating is that it's a new concept. Today, you do not have international companies. It doesn't exist. You have multinationals because they have a company set up in a bunch of different countries. But there is no international law, and you could not actually create a company that is international by nature. It's always linked to a country somewhere. The idea of a DAO was actually to create an organization that is native to the internet, where the legal authority to manage it is not the legal system of a country, but a smart contract and the internet. It's a weird idea, of course. It's something that isn't recognized by exactly nobody today. There are some states, some countries that try to find ways to recognize to a certain extent DAOs that actually then decide to be regulated or to obey the law of this country, but there's no such thing as a DAO right now in the legal doctrine. Is it going to change? I'm convinced it's going to change. It will take some time, but I'm pretty convinced that more and more we'll have countries that start recognizing it, and we've already lived this. We take it as granted that Europe actually recognized the notion of utility token. Utility token is a brand new concept that was accepted a few years ago, and I think DAOs will live a similar process where over time some regions, some countries will start being like, well, you know what, DAOs can be recognized, and we'll recognize them as a new type of organization. Once again, it will be long.
For sure.
But I think the main question that has to be answered is who gets to tax? I mean, this is what has to be solved, right?
This is the underlying question.
No, but the thing about this is that I actually think it's even, it might be an accelerator for DAOs. Because right now, if you're in Europe, for instance, why are most companies actually headquartered in Dublin? It's not because they love the weather, even though it's a beautiful country. It's actually because that's where they can optimize tax the most. And a bunch of countries in Europe are very pissed off about this, finding ways to alleviate this by putting like this 3% tax on your activities in the country and not just a corporate tax on where your HQ is. So it is already an issue. How do you tax actual companies today that have international presence but only a headquarters in one country? And I think to some extent DAOs could be a thing where you do not have the blockage of one country being like, well, actually I'm benefiting from the system, so I'm going to block everything. When you have a DAO and DAO pays taxes nowhere, then nobody is going to block, because you actually need to start instituting a law that says, hey, you're a DAO, you need to pay taxes, here's how we're going to tax you. And that tax can be based on activity on the territory, like this idea at the European level that was introduced on GAFAs.
So it will be probably individual taxation because of the situation about how it works. You cannot tax an entity which is fully decentralized. Like you said, we need to have some criteria to apply current rule of taxation, and could be for individuals or corporation which belongs to the DAO as a member. I think that's currently the only possibility to have a taxation.
So some form of pass-through, like the DAO, whatever mechanism, you make money, passes through to the holder, the token holder, DAO member, and wherever they live, they get taxed within that jurisdiction. This is what you're saying?
Yes.
Like one way to get around it, yeah.
But it's a bit...
I'm
Yes,
going to say a
Arthur.
big word, please don't leave the room, but imagine royalties to the state. Imagine if every transaction, depending on where you live or declare you live, a part of it, royalty, it wouldn't be called a royalty, but would go to the address of the state, French ETH address, for example, or Polkadot. That could be a thing, maybe, and we have the logic of it, of the automation of some parts of your selling that goes to another contract than you.
So, I mean, we're definitely talking about something that is not going to happen in the next 5 years, just to be clear. But I do think, but even though it's kind of funny because it's something that seems so remote, a lot of evolutions in corporate governance have actually followed a similar path. You used to be 100% liable for every business decision you made in a company. And then we introduced this idea of limited liability companies. I always kind of imagine the debtor's prison guy who went to the first LLC owner who had gone bankrupt and say, hey, you owe all this money to your debtors and I need to take you to prison. It's like, no, I have this paper that says that actually I don't owe anything, just the corporation I created and who's now bankrupt owes it to you, so go find this legal person that is a company that doesn't exist anymore, and they're the ones who owe your debt, not me. So we've created those weird ideas, weird concepts, and we can create a new concept called the DAO, and we can definitely create new ways of taxing based on the blockchain. I really don't see why that could not be possible.
Basically, you cannot escape from this, so make sure that you have made relevant decisions.
And I think maybe for today, what exists or what we tell our clients is that you need a legal wrapper for your existing DAO. I don't know if you've had to set up one, but depending on where you want to set it up, you have to set it up for the legal side of things, but also for the financial side of things. For example, it's difficult for how do you call it in English? For some fund of a pile of money to be spent by a smart contract legally. You have someone to be liable behind it.
So if we could make just a brief resume of this interesting panel, which is going to the end in the coming minutes, basically DAOs could be suitable for quite every kind of business, whatever you are located, but make sure that you have made right decision in terms of governance, in terms of how you will set up it, and if of course your product or service fit the market. If it's not, the community will not remain yours and will disappear. Thank you so much to all our experts tonight. Please, please could be a warm welcome for them, please. Thank you so much. Just stay on stage. I would like to know if there is some questions.